Welcome to Dangerous Policy. I'm Crispin. Today we have a very special guest. In fact, our first guest. Charlene is still here. She's behind the camera trying to make me look a little bit better. It's a lot of work, full-time job. And I want to talk today about India. So I've got my friend Tanvi here. And India, the reason I want to talk about India, aside from it obviously being a massive country, is that it's also, I think, in at least in the West, probably the biggest enigma, right? Like if you ask someone if they have an opinion about India, there's no one thing that you'll hear, and it's very hard to understand their contribution to history, the contribution to the world, what Indian culture is relative to those in the West, and given that it is a large and increasingly powerful nation, and that makes up sixth of the world's population, it would be good to have someone with an Indian background to be able to discuss some of the key differences, particularly someone who is exposed to the West and has a good background on both perspectives. So my first question to you, Tanvi, is what would be the most significant misconception people in the West, so Australia, UK, US, would have about India and Indian people?
Gosh, there are a few. I think the first thing that comes to mind, and I think that's purely based on personal experience,
Mm-hmm.
is that being recently married, I think a lot of people ask me, "Oh, is this an arranged marriage?" And it's true. Like a lot of people do think that most Indians, their marriages are arranged. So I guess for me, that's like one of the number one misconceptions that people have had.
So what is an arranged marriage?
So I guess the definition, speaking to someone of another Indian background in the last couple of days, she put it up quite well. So old definition of arranged marriage, basically where the parents or the family basically show you a picture of your prospective husband or bride, and that's who you're going to marry. This is when the date's going to be fixed. You kind of don't have a say in that. But I think the new definition of arranged marriage is more introducing. So you were introduced to someone rather than you obviously going and trying to find your life partner by yourself. That's happening a lot more commonly than arranged marriages now, versus, I guess, love marriages at the moment. So you have, I guess it depends where you are as well. So Western countries, it's a lot more progressive. You will hardly find Indians in arranged marriages. Yes, you might find them getting introduced to people, especially the older they get.
Mm-hmm.
But you will find a lot more people love marriages. I wouldn't say arranged marriages are completely gone. Arranged marriages still do occur in India, probably more rural India and probably areas where people are really uneducated.
So why would you have an arranged marriage? Like, what's the argument for it?
Um, well, I think the reason some people still go down the arranged marriage probably twofold. One being, and I think this is more true for rural areas, they're not educated and there's extreme poverty. So arranged marriages to some of those people give them an opportunity to go into another family where they can be taken care of, where that other family might have wealth. And the other side to it is simply some children are just completely happy with going with whichever way their parents want them to go with that. So I'm only going to marry the person that my mom and dad pick for me, and some people are okay with that.
So I guess, to tease that out a bit, is the only reason, like let's say you're a parent of an Indian child in India and you want to have arrange a marriage for that child.
Yep.
Is the only thing you're thinking about the economic aspect of it, or is there other considerations as well?
I think there are other considerations, but just to note that I don't think this happens as much anymore. So, I think India's moved a long way from this. I'm talking more about probably the minority that do this now. I think economic, yes, but it's also more about keeping family happy. Um, don't want to disappoint the family by disregarding someone that they may have picked for you. But again, very minor. Like I think a lot more people who are educated now are willing to sort of go down the love marriage part of things. And to some extent, some people are actually happy to be part of the introduced concept. So I've been unable to find a partner. Happy for my parents to speak to someone else they might know. Oh, this person's single, might be compatible. Bring them together, and then it's up to them whether or not they want to get together or not.
Okay. So if the only difference between an arranged marriage and a normal kind of love marriage is the origin of the introduction, is that pretty much the same thing? I guess another way I'd put it is the year of marriage seems to be somewhat different, right? Like I was sitting on a plane next to someone who was in an arranged marriage, and as I do on these sort of long haul flights that used to exist pre-COVID, I asked, well, what is this about? What are you doing in an arranged marriage? And she'd been married for 15 years or something, so she'd been around for a while. And she said, no, you don't understand. In the West, it's all flowers and romance and so on at the beginning. People rush into something and then they don't know what to do. Whereas in an arranged marriage, you start out neutral and then you sort of have to build on it over time and work out how you're going to make it all work, and that love can kind of evolve from that. Do you think that is like? And she seemed like a completely westernized person. It wasn't like she had this sort of backward, uneducated mindset. Is that something that is prevalent in Indian families, or is it?
I would say I would agree with what she said. Prevalent again to this day and age, depending on how many people actually go down the arranged marriage path. The ones that do, yeah, I think it is, because I think you do start out neutral if you're in an arranged marriage. The years that you've got with each other, your love sort of builds and grows as those years go. So I suppose it's, you're looking, there's always something to look forward to at each step. You haven't sort of done everything up until you get married, and then after that it's so yeah, I think what she said is probably accurate. We've got generations in our families that have had arranged marriages, that have had being introduced and love marriages, all different experiences.
It's interesting because, like, in the United States, it's not really a thing in Australia, but in the US, there's always the tradition of the guy going to the girl's father and taking him out somewhere and then explaining to him that he wants to marry the guy's daughter. And it's kind of this weird thing because it's already been decided, right? Like, it's like he's already asked her. She's already said yes. What the dad says is kind of superfluous. It's sort of just a sign of respect and tradition in kind of American mindsets. Like if the dad says, no, I don't agree, well, she's probably going to run away. And whereas in India, it seems like parents are much more involved in the decision-making process. Is that?
Yes, they are definitely much more involved. But I wouldn't say that, again, because we've become so progressive now, I think you'll find that the generation now as well, and probably one generation prior, might also fit into what you've just said. So it's more the elder generations where I think this was a lot more prevalent. Yes, family takes a huge part into this. So if mum and dad didn't accept, for example, those generations might, put family ahead of their own personal affection, if you like. Whereas nowadays, I would tend to think that it's fairly similar to the West. But family does play a huge part, an absolute huge part in this. So I think across the board, I'm sure also for the West, everybody wants their family to be accepting of who they're going to marry, who they're not going to be, who they're going to be wanting to be with for the rest of their life. So
what are the most common objections? Like if you.
So this is interesting because I think back to your point about misconceptions, intercaste marriages. Mm-hmm. So I think that to this day there are still some objections to that. Again, like I keep saying, India has become a lot more progressive, and Indians around the world have become a lot more progressive. So intercaste marriages are acceptable nowadays. You will still find those few that where intercaste marriages are a no-no. So that is one objection. I think as people become more educated in these countries and basically anywhere in the world, the argument for not having an intercaste marriage is just not there. So I think in the past it was, and I guess to some extent, some areas of India to date, more so rural, intercaste marriage is an objection purely because, how can one faith or one culture mix in with another faith and culture? So rather than thinking about people as just individuals, that still happens. So that's probably one of the main objections I would see.
Okay. Well, that's really interesting. So, I mean, one thing that strikes me, I was looking up in preparation for this sort of divorce rates and things in India versus the West. And in India, the divorce rate is something like less than half. The age of marriage is kind of lower. The reported happiness in marriage seems to be higher. So it seems like there's something that works, and kind of.
Yeah, it's quite interesting what you talk about in terms of the divorce rates with India and Indians, because this is another thing a lot of people do talk to me about. So there's, when divorce comes into the conversation, I find a few people say to me, "Oh, not many Indians actually get divorced. Is that because they're all happy?" So I think I would say that that's not always the answer. I think there's a widespread stigmatism associated with divorce amongst Indians and people in India. But like I said, people are becoming more progressive now. So you will find a lot more people are finding it okay to go and seek divorce if they're not happy. You look back, I don't know, 20, 30 years ago, you will find that people would have stuck it out during that time because divorce amongst the status, the society, the community, your religious groups was a stigma. You don't want to be walking around and someone saying, "Oh, she got divorced," or "he got divorced recently." But I think nowadays a lot more people are educated, so they do understand that someone's not happy, divorce is an acceptable option. So yeah, I think back to your point, I think love for me would be number 10. Definitely number 10. It's quite subjective, so I think it depends. For my children, love would have to be up there.
Oh well, future Tanvi kids. When they're a teenager and they're like, "I want to run away with her," and mum's very unhappy with that decision, play this back. You'll have solid ammunition.
I think running away is another thing. But so you probably wouldn't get into those situations if you've got the support of people. And again, family is a big thing for us. So I had the support of my family and my partner had the support of his family. So it's a lot easier for us, but not everyone has that. And hence why some people choose to run away. So,
okay. So what about, so you say intercaste marriage is somehow, like in some instances, still frowned upon. With Indian expats all over the world, and obviously exposure to non-Indians becoming normal, but it's obviously influencing these ideas. What about Indians marrying non-Indians? How is that viewed?
Yeah, I think there's a bit of, it's acceptable. It is acceptable. I think a lot more people are now open to this idea of non-Indians and Indians getting married. It depends where you are. So we're in the West, yes, so many more people are open to that idea now. People have come off that thinking that you can only marry into your caste. You can only marry another Indian caste, for example, because they're going to understand our culture, they're going to understand the language, they understand our practices. I think a lot more people now are understanding the fact that it's at the individual level that people should be looking at. You could have a non-Indian know a lot about the Indian culture and an Indian know nothing about the Indian culture. So I think a lot more people are educated in that sense. Now, if you take it back to, let's say, rural India or places in India where there's extreme uneducation, they're not educated at all about these sort of things, I think that will definitely be a no-no. There's things such as honor killings as well in certain countries for you just stepping out of your caste. So this is the next step. And I think some of those things, without doing much research on it, I think there still would be some of that. So I think, yes, in the West and, personal experience, we've got family members that are non-Indian, assimilated wonderfully into our culture, understanding of so many of the other things we do, our culture, language, cultural practices, traditions. So from my experience, it's been positive. And I think that's been because people around us are educated, people around us are supportive of that. And they understand that it's not just because you're from another religion or another culture doesn't make you someone that's not worthy of the class, if that makes sense.
Well, I mean, it's one